the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, EARCs light up the night sky, and all the cell phones on Earth ring simultaneously with excitement with the possibility of containing such wondrous verbiage. Stratospheric, pillar-sitting saints and Paleolithic wallowers in mud and bone. Well, as we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we have the second entry in a multi-part interview with David Weber and Jacob Holo. They are talking about their big new time travel space fighting novel, The Valkyrie Protocol. David and Jacob discuss the characters, all taken from various timelines and universes. It's one of those time travel books. The amazing setting of twisted universes and the excellent story, which involves the Black Plague and an even scarier black hole that's sucking up universes in time itself. So that is coming up. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. It's a Weber Palooza. Now here's the news. Don't forget the October post-apocalypse ebook sale. Until the stroke of midnight on Halloween, save big on John Ringo ebooks. Save $2 per ebook in John Ringo's Black Tide Rising original series, plus $1 off on all other John Ringo ebooks. This includes all the things we sell on Amazon, Baen.com, and elsewhere, everywhere ebooks are distributed by Baen. Sale begins Saturday, October 3rd, and it runs through Halloween Eve. We have 3 great EARCs now available at Baen.com. Now, an EARC is the flash in the sky right before the sunrise on the Sea of Serenity on the moon, which tends to spark over to the Sea of Crisis and wreak havoc with the regolith. No, that's not what an EARC is at all. An EARC is an electronic advanced reading copy. We sell these to you 3 or 4 months before the book comes out in print. This is the book after the copy edit and before the final proofread, and it's available to you in ebook form directly, early, fresh, because reading the very latest from great authors is cool. Now out in EARC format is the Jupiter Knife EARC by DJ Butler and Aaron Michael Ritchey. An ancient evil haunts the land. Southeastern Utah, 1934. A dark and ancient conspiracy is afoot in a small town set amid endless hills of warped and twisted sandstone. Local law enforcement seems powerless to stop a murderous magic from claiming victim after victim. Unraveling the plot will require a man of skill, a man equally at ease with magic and reason, a good man, a man of humility, but also a cunning man. Hiram Woolley has these qualities, but his practiced command of old-world Brocker skill and folklore magic may have met its match when faced with the primeval curse as ancient as human history itself. And now out in EARC form is the Macedonian Hazard by Eric Flint, Paula Goodlett, and Gorg Huff. Stranded in a distant past of hope and strife, cruise ship Queen of the Sea has been accidentally transported from the modern-day present to the ancient Mediterranean not long after the death of Alexander the Great. Now Captain Lars Flodden and the other ship people attempt to plant the seeds of 21st century civilization in the distant past. Finally, out now is the EARC for Domesticating Dragons by Dan Cobalt. The dragons are among us. In the near future, all the dogs are dead from an incurable plague. The solution? Domesticated dragons. Noah Parker, a brilliant young genetic engineer, is thrilled to land his dream job, helping Reptilian Corp put dragons in every home. But while happily creating custom-built dragons, Noah discovers that Reptilian Corp itself may not be all that it seems. delving into dangerous matters that someone very powerful does not wish discovered. Noah must seek the key to a secret locked in the genetic heart of a new breed of science-made dragons. The E-Arc editions of Domesticating Dragons by Dan Cobalt, The Macedonian Hazard by Eric Flint, Paula Goodlett, and Gorg Huff, and the Jupiter Knife E-Arc by DJ Butler and Aaron Michael Ritchey are now available in all e-book formats at Baen.com. Taste them, try them. You'll get them sooner than anybody else besides me and the authors, and let me tell you, they are piping hot reading goodness. This is part 2 of a multi-part interview with David Weber and Jacob Holo talking about the Valkyrie Protocol. Part 3 will be available next time on the podcast. I want to welcome David Weber and Jacob Holo to the podcast. Hello, folks, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
It's wonderful to have you back in Technicolor this time. David Weber is the creator of the Honor Harrington series, the Oath of the Sword series, and, well, about a billion other series, including one called the Gordian Division. There are more than 8 million copies of his books in print, and 33 titles so far have made the New York Times bestseller list. According to Marla Ainspan here, our tabulator.
And she should know, yeah.
She should know. Who is the associate publisher at Baen, by the way. He's collaborated with many excellent authors, including Starfire on the Starfire series with Steve White, the Empire Man series with John Ringo, the Multiverse series more recently with Joel Presby, Linda Evans before, the Ring of Fire series with Eric Flint, among others. And that's just to touch on some of the things that David has done. And now the Gordian Division series with Jacob Holo. Jacob Holo graduated from Youngstown State University with a degree in electrical and controls engineering. He is the author of 8 books, including 2 Gordian Division novels written with David Weber. Between novels, Jacob enjoys gaming of all sorts, whether video gaming, card gaming, miniature wargaming, or watching speedruns on YouTube. He is a former Ohioan, which is a very difficult thing to say, by the way. I practiced a former Ohioan.
Well, you realize I was born in Cleveland.
You are a former Clevelander.
I am a former Ohioan Clevelander. Very former in my case.
Former Michigander, who now lives in South Carolina with his wife boss and his cat boss. And out now at booksellers everywhere is the Valkyrie Protocol, which really looks cool when I hold it up because it's green. It's very ghostly.
Yes.
When you look at it.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So,
ooh.
I think this is, well, the plague of Justinian happens in the Byzantine Empire. What is it, like 400?
541 is when it starts.
Yeah, and this is which is an old Baen trope, which is Belisarius survives, and he's a great, because Jim Baen loved Belisarius.
Yes, so. He loved him some Belisarius.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Jacob, you really built the technology of what they were trying to do and originally structured the interaction of the time travelers with the 6th century Byzantines. And then
I knew going into that just given where my strengths are and where my strengths are not, that you were going to have to come through and, work on those scenes.
Yeah.
My focus at the time when I was working on the first draft of those scenes was to, establish a strong foundation for you to build upon. And I go ahead.
That was what I was going to say is, and I want you to talk about it in just a minute, but what Jacob had done, we had discussed where we wanted to go with the book, and then we had a conference where we threw everything we discussed away and in 2 hours restructured the entire book. Jacob did not know about shiny moments when he decided that he would work with me. He now knows about shiny moments. But we'd structured the general, this is what's going to happen. And then Jacob structured the actual time travel and the events that took place in terms of the technology that was available to them, what they had when they lost it, and everything else. And then he wrote enough material going through there to make everything he'd done work. Okay? So, Jacob, I think you're probably the best one to talk about the technology that they do have and how they apply it.
Well, before you do that, I would like to discuss my favorite scene in the book, which is when Theodora takes on those two Byzantine soldiers.
Okay, that was originally Jacob. Yes. Yeah. Jacob,
So,
you want to?
Yeah, sure. That's the first draft of that's my scene. It's Theodora and Samuel Pepys. They are basically scoping out Antioch, and they're still in their rather strange garb, and they have some essentially cloaked little drones that are going around and feeding them images back, and they're really focused on that, and maybe we should snag some clothes so we can perhaps have a better chance of blending in. And two soldiers show up, and
the other thing is Theodora is not physically entirely human.
Well, actually, she is entirely human. She just happens to be living in a synthetic body, which exactly replicates her. If you've read any of the Safehold books, okay, this is basically what the Terran Federation of the Safehold books would have considered a liberated pica. Okay, she is a legal person. She's the person she was when she was still flesh and blood. She's just uploaded herself into the synthetic body, which has a few upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they try to take her in, and at this point, she's just had it.
She's had a really bad day.
She's had a really, really rough, rough couple of days. And,
those temporal shipwrecks will do it to you every time.
So she just tosses him like a rag doll.
In addition to her synthetic body with all this strength and whatnot, Art is required. You got to have your implants and whatnot. You're required to download unarmed combat techniques. So he's basically taking on a karate expert who is like 10 times as strong as a normal human being and whatnot.
And I think there's a moment in there where one of the soldiers is like, "What are you?" And she says, "I'm a historian." That just headbutts the guy, breaks his nose.
Doesn't he accuse her of being a demon? And she says, "No, I'm worse than that. I'm a historian."
Her of being a demon.
And you just don't want to take on historians.
Yeah, that is absolutely Jacob in that scene. I tinkered a little tiny bit with the dialogue from the Byzantine soldiers, but everything else that was pure Jacob. And
it's really fun because it's like that. It's like that in the first Superman movie where Superman comes back and he's got his powers back, and those guys try to beat him up again, and nope.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think so.
Anyway, so and this is sort of the identity that Theodora takes as she goes forward in this past is that of a Valkyrie.
Yeah, the Valkyrie, really.
And that's why, I mean, this is where we're getting the title.
Yes.
Part of the title from.
Yeah. Okay, one of the things that we had to figure out how to do, and Jacob structured this too when we got there, is they had to go back with tools that would let them make significant changes in the history with which they were interacting. But they had to be handicapped in a way that would present them from just saying, okay, fine, we're going to integrate 30th century technology into the 6th century and be off and running. And we managed that by blowing up 2/3 of their time travel ship and letting the rest crash from a couple of 1,000 feet. But so go, Jacob, because you're the one who built that.
Well, they part of it is that they thought that they got away scot-free. And this is where the relationship between Siskov and the admin starts to take a turn.
Yes.
And take a turn in a positive direction.
For a change.
For a change.
Now, explain what you mean by they got away scot-free. So they did not go back in time with their bosses thinking they were going to go and stop the plague of Justinian, right?
Well, they didn't go back in time with their boss's approval at all. Their mission had been approved, and it was going to be this little minor thing of returning peeps and observing what happened. And what they actually meant to do was, as soon as they got out from under Mom's thumb, they were going to go scooting back to deal with the plague of Justinian anyway. Yeah. But their permission got revoked because Jacob killed another universe.
Actually.
Yes, and the news of having killed the other universes arrived just as their mission had been approved. Everybody says, "Are you crazy? This is not the time for us to be fooling around with this stuff," etc. So since they had lost permission, they stole the chronoport and went back on their own. Okay.
And because the TTV, the transtemporal vehicle that they had, is basically almost the fastest one that Siskov has available. They have two that are faster, but they're pure science vessels, and they're not maneuverable enough. They could catch up, but they would just overshoot, and they couldn't bring them in.
I think the difference between an F-15 and a Saturn V. The Saturn V could catch up with the F-15, but it couldn't stop real well.
That's actually, that's a very good analogy there. Yeah. So really all they could do is have another time machine pursuing them, but they could never gain on them. And because the kind of temporal wake that's created, they're half blind anyway.
Yeah, I think of it as the bow wave that you can't see through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Gordian Division thinks that they've gotten away. And then Jonas Shigeki,
the son of
Saba Shigeki, who is with the admin ambassador, says that
Okay, but before you go there, okay, Siskov knows how to move back and forth between universes. The admin doesn't have that tech at the beginning of this book, and Siskov has been very careful not to give it to them. Okay. So what does Jonas say?
Says that let me just show this graph of, okay, here's what the rogue time machine is doing, and here's your pursuit craft, and here's a third line. And see, and this is, if we had that technology, we could bring one of our chronoports over here,
which is a lot faster.
Catch up. Yes. Because we have a speed advantage. We just can't cross from one universe to the other. And it's like, oh man, I'd love to be able to help you guys, but we're just sorry.
While you think about it, I think they're serving Chinese down in the cafeteria, and I'm feeling a little munchy.
So they just head out the room, and all the Siskov people are there, and Rybert's like, we're not going to do this. Something this foolish, are we?
And then they looks around. He says, "Are we?" And the next thing you see is him reporting for duty with admin while they go back.
We really are going to do something this too.
Yeah. Well, and one of the advantages of this scene, it had to happen because we needed for admin to have that tech for the climactic portion of the book. But the way that admin gets it, the way that it's given to them, gives us an additional opportunity to show that the guys from admin aren't really monsters. There's a particular moment in the pursuit, and this was in Jacob's original draft. I did I don't know that I did anything with this scene. I might have smoothed a little dialogue here or there, but Jonas is talking to Raybert, and Raybert wants to try and talk them into coming back. And Jonas is saying, that's way too risky. They've got a powerfully armed craft. They've already tried to kill us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Raybert is forced to acknowledge that Jonas is right. And then Jonas says, okay, now that we've got that established, let's see what we can do about getting them back alive. And Raybert is like, but you said, and Jonas said, I needed you to acknowledge that if we can't, but we will do our best to get them back alive. And it's a small moment that Jacob worked in. I mean, it's like maybe a third of a page, okay? But it is an absolutely laser-focused peek inside the way that Jonas's brain really works, the way that his personality really works. And it is also really the first opening of the door for Raybert, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, I think the admin is still always going to be the effing admin to him.
Yes.
But
well, I don't know. They turned him into fertilizer. I can't imagine why he'd, hold a grudge.
But that's, I think, like the first point where he actually sees hope that, hey, we can, our two societies can actually, get along and not just exist together, but, work, and integrate together.
I think what's interesting is that the primary reason for that scene to exist was for Raybert to have that moment. I mean, that was the real reason for that scene to be written. But the effect that it had in humanizing Jonas and letting us further inside him for the reader, not just Raybert, was a really, really good example of the kind of serendipity that good writing produces. Okay, when you get done with a scene and you look at it and you realize that it has facets you weren't even aware of when you were writing it. It wasn't what you were trying to do, but by golly, look, we did this as well. And
this is the other storyline in the book. This is Raybert, and a lot of it has to do with the fact there are two universes, Admin and the Siskov universe. They're not just different societies; they exist in different places. They exist on different timelines and different universes. Yeah, universes, and so, and both of them are learning that they have a common interest in protecting the timelines and their own existence. Right?
Shigeki's universe, Admin, is an offshoot of the same root universe as Siskov, but the point of separation has been far enough ago. Jacob designed the mechanism. Which one is
really real is not.
They both are, but
yes.
the thing is that they are. Hang on a second, Eric. I'm in the middle of a podcast with Tony right now. Probably yes. Okay, I'll get back. Anyway, there is no longer a point of contiguity between Admin and Siskov. Jacob came up with what I thought was a really neat mechanism for it's like, okay, here's the point at which these two universes separate. And then they kind of peel apart going in both directions, past and future. And eventually they separate entirely. Until they do, there's still a linkage between them. And Admin and Siskov have entirely separated from one another. The problem is when the Valkyrie universe catches up with the 30th century, they are still very, very close together, and they haven't fully separated all the way back into the past. So the Valkyrie universe is associated with Siskov, but not with Admin. So in theory, Admin is immune to anything that happens in the Syscov/Valkyrie universe. However, Jacob likes big, stumpy robots, and he also likes big Death Stars. So
guilty as charged.
Yes. So he built the time-traveling Death Star.
Well, we don't want to talk too much about that, but there is a very large time travel spaceship battle. And
there's two. One of them goes better than the other one. Okay. One of the primary things that I did when I got involved with Jacob's rough draft is that the biggest thing that I did was to go back and rewrite and add to the scenes in the 6th century. For example, Ephraim wasn't in the original manuscript, and the actual scene where Theodora interacts with Justinian wasn't in there. Most of the rest of it, except for polishing a little bit here or there, tweaking a little bit of dialogue, I think I probably changed a couple of sentences here and there that were narrative, but very little. Most of the rest of it is exactly the way that Jacob had structured it in the original rough draft, including the final battle sequence,
which was the hardest action set piece that I have ever worked on. Because
welcome to my world.
Well, not only in plotting it out, mm-hmm. but also in writing and communicating what was going on to the reader.
Well,
because you're dealing with military vessels that have 4 axes of motion. X, Y, Z, and T. They can dodge into last week, and so.
Well, they actually have still an additional axis, because in theory they could dodge from one universe to another one.
Yes. So, yeah. Once we get the multiverse part of it into it, there are actually 7 spatial dimensions to keep track of.
And another part of it is that when you have a battle that's as intense and spread over as much space and so forth as this one is, you have to be careful about keeping track of the casualties that have been taken. Okay, remembering how many ships you have left after you've just blown up 17 more of them, or whatever.
I had a lot of spreadsheets.
Yep.
What is some of the weapons that they have in the Tech-9? They're what are they fighting with, and what is this theoretical thing called the C-bomb?
Well, the C-bomb is sort of the F-bomb of the of the Gordian universe. Yeah, it's the big F-bomb. It's the Moab, the mother of all bombs. Well, the weapons mix is we got particle beams, we got lasers. We got missiles. We've got kinetic cannon, sea guns. The kind of the sort of standard, I guess, in a way, really high tech military hardware mix. And as Jacob says, you've got these ships who are employing this while dodging through all these multiple dimensions. Plus, you've got the Portcullis class. Which is an admin design that can inhibit the operation of phase fields in its vicinity so that people can't dodge in and out as much. But the C-bomb is... Okay, how do we do this without giving away too much of the plot?
Well, don't give away anything.
By the way, okay, here's the thing. The C-bomb can solve the problem for Syscov at a very high cost to other universes. And the problem is they're not absolutely sure that when they set it off, it won't also kill off Syscov. It's just their best shot. Does that seem to cover it, Jacob?
Yeah. I mean, there are also the phase missiles.
Oh, yes, I forgot those, yes. Lucius's contribution. They can actually go after somebody who is phasing out to evade your fire, which standard missiles can't. They have phase drives in them. That was one of the cleverer things.
So not only does this third group have a time-traveling Death Star, but they can park this thing in last week and launch essentially an infinite supply of nuclear-tipped miniature time machines, the phase missiles, into the present. And if you don't have time travel, you can't defend against this at all.
Yeah.
What are the? I mean,
and most, by the way, and most planets don't have time travel. I just thought I'd throw that out. You know?
Part of the we should talk about this theoretically because it will give too much away. But there is the cool idea. One of the cool ideas in the book is the idea of temporal replication and the consequences thereof. And one of the sides has this as because they don't care.
Well, most of them don't know.
Yes.
The only people who know don't care.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're not.
Which is a cool idea, and I've always thought it would be great to be able to just make things by taking the future version and remaking it.
Well, one of the things
that just seems like it's going to cause problems somehow.
One of the things that Jacob very much wanted to do was to establish some hard limits. He and I both agree, I think, that what matters the most is what your character can't do rather than what your character can do. And when you look at it on the face of it, if you can go back and you can bring the Library of Alexandria to the present and it's still there, there's no reason you can't do it with an air conditioning unit or whatever else you want. So, Jacob, you want to explain why that's a really bad idea?
Well, I mean, from a a story standpoint and a series longevity standpoint, having an ability like temporal replication without any sort of limits on it is, in my opinion, I think David, you agree with me, is simply too powerful a tool to leave at in the character's toolkit.
It's a god weapon. If nothing else, everybody's trapped in the buffers of the transporter. Nobody dies. Because all you do is you go back and you grab them from 20 minutes before they died, you bring them back with you to the future, and they're like, okay, fine, here I am. All right. But Jacob was absolutely right that this was something that had to be nailed down within limits that were manageable for the storyteller.
And it becomes a MacGuffin. It becomes a plot turning point because it's such a powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and because logically, unless you are aware of the physics reason why it's a really bad idea, it is the ideal solution to any scarcity problem. Okay. The SysGov is, for all intents and purposes, a post-scarcity economy. Jacob and I kind of went around and around a little bit on that. And he explained to me that, well, it's not a totally post-scarcity economy because they need a lot of exotic matter to make this all work. And the exotic matter is the choke point in their economy, which makes perfectly good sense. But without some reason why you can't just replicate stuff, then you're kind of where Larry Niven was with Ringworld when he'd produced all the devices you could possibly need to solve a problem. There was no longer something the characters couldn't do. Okay? And we didn't want to break the transporter every episode. So, and I thought Jacob handled it in an elegant fashion. The way that he set up the mechanism for why, well, it seemed like a good idea, but oh boy, it wasn't, kind of thing.
Let's shift over to the other problem that's going on, which is in Raybert, Kaminsky and the transtemporal vehicle Cleo and Elzbieta and Ben Schroeder and and our Viking AI, Philo. Yeah,
Philo. Philosophus, otherwise known as Philo.
They are on this. They've encountered something in their travels back, and it's not a good. They pick up a girl who has escaped from something horrible, and they're almost sucked into this thing. What is it?
Jacob, you're the one who makes universes go bang.
well.
Okay, it doesn't go bang. All right, I give you that. Okay.
So what they get swept up in is a universe that is undergoing an implosion, and it's not an implosion in a physical sense. It's not like, you know, the big crunch, you know, in terms of like, you know, all the matter in the universe having enough pull and then contracting back to whatever physics predicts the big crunch would be. It is an implosion of its timeline, and what that character Sarah sees is essentially pieces of their present being pulled into the past and just vanishing from the present. And so their timeline, the entire timeline of that universe, is collapsing inward on itself.
Actually, her universe is not collapsing inward on itself.
There is an adjacent universe that is actually undergoing the implosion, and it's having, you can think of it like a balloon deflating is, I think, an analogy that we might touch on. And this other universe that is branched off of it, that's the one Sarah's from, is essentially suffering a fate that Siskov could suffer in this book.
Yeah, the point of separation for these two universes is recent enough that they're still close enough together in a trans-universal sense that when the wall of the original parent universe ruptures, it produces a rupture in the wall of its daughter universe. And the implosive force is great enough that it's draining both universes down the original stem. Okay, and the problem that Siskov has when they realize that there's another universe that could do this is that it's a child universe that is only very recently separated from them. And if it goes, they almost certainly go with it. And they have, this is what happened to these two universes over here provides their theoretical model for understanding what may happen to them in similar circumstances.
So this is the black hole of time, the really bad thing that can happen, and it is ultimately it's related to the other story that we're following with Theodora and Lucius and the Byzantines as well, of course.
Yeah, I would say that rather than it's being related to that story, it is what informs one set of actors in that story of the potential consequences. There is no physical connection of any sort between those two universes and any of our universes. So in terms of a direct physical impact, there isn't one. In terms of understanding what's happening, it's absolutely crucial to both the reader and the characters in the book.
There's two different, in the first book you established how a universe could disappear, and now you have another way.
Listen, he's got a third one in mind too, people. I just want you to know. People who accuse me of killing characters. What if only they knew.
I have promised David.
Yes, I know.
Will not
I'm just reminding you every time I get a chance. Okay.
Another two
Well, you're
books.
both complicit. You're both the greatest mass murderers in all of history at this point.
Well, I think one of the
We
things,
murdered history itself.
yes. Well, the sequel to to Valkyrie, which Jacob has finished the rough draft on and already gotten to me, is very much a change of pace. It is much more of, we think of it as our police procedural novel. And what we're looking at is probably ongoing. This is a series, but it's not a series like any of my other series, because all of my other series, I had a start point and I had a projected end point. Okay. For this one, I have a projected start point, and the series is just going to be, built on what happened in the preceding books. So it's going to be open-ended in that sense, but it's also not going to have a bunch of plot strands that are unresolved in this book, because I'm planning on resolving them somewhere further down the road. So each of them will be a satisfactory read in its own right.
Well, you've created the possibility of this episodic structure by the fact that you have a time patrol. The Gordian Division.
We have, but
thing.
Our episodic, the way we're looking at it, goes further than that. If you look at Piper's Paracops, basically the characters, the episodes were completely disconnected, except by the fact that they had common characters in them. Okay, as this series goes along, we're going to be spending more time with the characters and the societies themselves than Piper did. And so one of the elements of this series is going to be the character growth and the growth of the societies and the exploration of them in ways that Piper's story format just didn't allow for, where the parent societies were concerned. You see what I'm saying? And in this book, basically you have a criminal investigation that involves time travel and other interesting things. And Jacob got a reading assignment before we did this. Tony and I, between us, introduced him to a writer that I think he's become rather fond of.
Oh, Ed McBain.
Yes.
87th Precinct.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Oh, those are so good.
That's how you do police procedurals, okay?
I mean, when I was reading those books, this was, basically my first introduction to police procedurals, and I was like, man, where have these books been all my life? And it was like, the rough draft for book 3. It was my first time writing a police procedural, obviously one with a very strong science fiction element, but ultimately a police procedural. And it's like, wow, I really like writing sci-fi police procedurals. I want to do more of these.
See, that's why we're going to keep it from blowing up universes. If you don't blow up a universe, I'll let you write another police procedure. But what we're looking at probably going down the road is that the ones that have universe-shaking events in them and wind up with new rules having to be laid down governing how time travel and whatnot works, they will probably all have protocol in the title. Because the Valkyrie Protocol at the end of this book is a specific addition to the rules and the laws governing time travel, which both the admin and Sysgov have signed off on. And so there will be future protocols down the road.
And the Gordian Protocol is don't go back in time and rape and kill and pillage.
Pretty much, yeah.
So, that's the rule we start with.
What actually caused the problem in the Gordian Protocol was not anything that Art had done. Nobody knew what caused the problem in the Gordian Protocol until they fixed the problem in the Gordian Protocol. Now, there's another component of this time travel stuff that Jacob built in that I thought was really good. He built in an absolute clock. Okay, the true present, or the edge of existence, is as far as time has gone yet. So you can't travel into the future from there because the future hasn't happened yet. You can travel into the past. But when you travel into the past, what you do there is still, in a sense, pegged to the progress of time that you left. Jacob, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying Rybert goes back in time when he was working for the Antiquities Rescue Trust, and he spends, a month on assignment, and then he goes back to the 30th century. A month has passed in the 30th century. So one of the
That was part 2 of a multi-part interview with David Weber and Jacob Holo talking about the Valkyrie Protocol. Part 3 will be available next time on the podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
HMS Fafnir, Task Force 31, 3rd Fleet, Beowulf Terminus. Actually, Marianne, I thought the exercise went very well, Admiral Alice Truman said as the stewards cleared away the supper dishes. For what it was, yes, ma'am, Vice Admiral Marianne Holman Sanders replied, a bit more formally than she was in the habit of addressing Truman. It's just that all my people feel like we're only marking time until they scrap our ships, like we're not pulling our weight in the defense of our own star system. Truman frowned at Holman Sanders across the table in her dining cabin. The diminutive Beowulfer, she wasn't quite 155 centimeters tall, who commanded 3rd Fleet's 2nd Task Force, was a solid professional. She might look like someone's pre-prolonged teenage sister, but no one who'd ever seen her on a super dreadnought's flag bridge would make that mistake. At the moment, however, what she looked most was pissed. Not at Truman, her task force commander, but at the weapon she'd been given, or at fate, perhaps. If your people think you aren't pulling your weight, you're the only ones who do, Truman said a bit sternly. Oh, we don't think it's because we're slacking, ma'am. Holman Sanders shook her head. What we think is that at this moment, all the other members of the Grand Alliance will do any real fighting while we sort of stand there with our thumbs up our backsides and watch. She grimaced. Let's face it, none of our wallers is even in shouting distance of your wallers. There's something to that, Truman conceded after a thoughtful sip of coffee. She set her cup down, trapped it in an open diamond formed by her thumbs and forefingers, and frowned down into it. Then she looked back up at Holman Sanders. Compared to a current-generation Manticoran SDP, your Leander really is obsolescent. No offense, Captain Francois. None taken, ma'am. Henriette Francois, Holman Sanders' flag captain, replied. The truth is the truth. She shrugged. I love Leander, and I'd hate to give her up, but she's the better part of 42 years old, and there's a limit to what upgrades and refits can do. Especially when someone goes and introduces a revolution in missile warfare and none of the new launchers will even fit, Holman Sanders said acerbically. Well, yes, Truman acknowledged. But you're comparing her to current-generation Manticoran, Havenite, or Grayson ships, not one of which is even 10 years old. And I think the point you need to bear in mind is that that's not who you'll be fighting if it comes down to it. Who you'll be fighting are the Solis, whose ships are a lot farther behind the curve than yours are, Your ships are obsolescent. Theirs are obsolete death traps. Trust me, if it comes to a shootout with the SLN, your people will hold up your end. Maybe the newer ships will do the really heavy lifting, but your people will be a huge part of our defensive envelope. And with Admiral Foraker's latest version of the donkey, you've got a hell of an offensive punch, at least in the opening phase. I know, Holman Sanders said and snorted. Actually, I think a lot of it's simple envy. We want our new ships and we want them now. Of course you do, and they're coming. Truman picked up her cup and drank more coffee, then shrugged. Truth in advertising, though. They won't be here the day after tomorrow. I know. This time it came out as a sigh, and Holman Sanders sat back from the table and crossed her legs. She and Francois knew as well as Truman did why those ships wouldn't arrive next week. The Grand Alliance had rationalized its industrial output ruthlessly, with most of Beowulf's heavy fabrication capacity dedicated to rebuilding the Manticore binary system after the Iwata strike. It hadn't ended there, though, because the Alliance's existing SDP strength was more than sufficient to handle anything the SLN had. Because of that, the proportion of Beowulf's industry not dedicated to rebuilding Manticore had been switched to the fleet support role, not new construction. Facilities like Ivaldi of Beowulf had been churning out Mark 23 MDMs, Mark 16 DDMs, Ghost Rider drones, Dazzlers, and Dragon's Teeth. But while ammunition and spare parts were critical, future expansion hadn't been totally neglected. Other facilities were producing the components, like microfusion plants and miniaturized FTL comms. Haven's industrial base couldn't manufacture quite yet, and that was likely to accelerate the delivery of Beowulf System Defense Force's first modern capital ships. Bolt Hole's stupendous shipyards had undertaken an ambitious construction program of SDPs built to a new common Manticore Haven design. Haven's basic technology in areas like FTL comms and missile tech, Keyhole 2 came to mind in that connection, remained significantly inferior to that of Manticore and Grayson, but Bolt Hole's construction rate was almost as high as Manticore's had been at the peak of its pre-Iwata strike capacity. That meant there'd be a lot of new hulls remarkably soon, but they'd be completed in what could only be called a bare-bones configuration. They'd be fitted with engines, life support, point defense, counter-missile launchers, armor, missile cores and pod rails, broadside weapons and basic sensors, then transitioned to Beowulf's Cassandra yards for the installation of Keyhole 2, FTL comms, and current-generation fire control and ECM suites to create an end product fully as capable as the RMN's Invictus class. Spreading production between multiple locations was enough to make any logistician queasy, given the way it multiplied potential failure points. If it worked as planned, though, it would increase building rates by something like 30%, provide complete commonality of weapons, support systems, spare parts, and maintenance procedures for all the Allied Navy's future construction, and get the first of the new ships into commission at least 6 T-months earlier than any other approach. And 1/4 of all the ships fitted out here in Beowulf would be assigned to the Beowulf System Defense Force's component of Grand Fleet. But not tomorrow. Leaving aside your unbecoming greediness for new toys, Truman said now, her smile taking any sting from her choice of words, what's your assessment, your real assessment, Marianne, of your people's performance? Well, put that way, I'd say my assessment would have to be not too shabby, Holman Sanders said with an answering smile. Mind, I want more time for my people to work with yours. Not a problem now that Mycroft's operational, Truman said with a shrug, and Holman Sanders nodded. The Beowulf terminus was critical to the Grand Alliance, and the task of protecting it had been assigned to Task Force 31, the Manticoran portion of Truman's Third Fleet. Actually, she wore 2 hats, as the CO of both Third Fleet and TF-31, and her task force covered the terminus mostly because the Manticoran ships had the missile range and firepower to punch out any Solarian attack foolish enough to head its way. Politics and the need to keep foreigners out of the inner system had played their own part prior to the referendum, and however much Holman Sanders might have yearned for more modern ships, she'd never doubted her own super dreadnought's ability to defend the inner system using the towed missile pods her allies had provided. But until Mycroft was able to relieve her task group of that responsibility, opportunities for joint training with the rest of Truman's ships had been few and far between. Now that Mycroft was online and had passed every check with flying colors, she'd been able to pull TF-32, Third Fleet's second task force, out of the inner system, join Truman on the terminus, and start joint training with a vengeance. With that in mind, Truman continued, Captain Kovalenko and I have been thinking about the next exercise's parameters. Given the fact that your ship's current configuration gives them a massive initial throw weight, but very little in the way of sustained engagement capacity, it occurred to us that we might— Her comm pinged suddenly, and she stiffened as she recognized the urgent priority signal. She raised her left hand in a hold that thought gesture and stabbed the acceptance key with her right index finger. Truman, she said, talk to me. Me, ma'am. Captain Benjamin Masters, her chief of staff, said tersely from the display. System Defense HQ just commed. They've detected incoming hyper footprints. They didn't get a good count on the footprints, but the impeller wedges confirms a minimum, I repeat, a minimum of 400 point sources, most of them battlecruiser range. Holman Sanders inhaled sharply, and Truman's stomach muscles clenched. The Beowulf terminus was 362 LM from the system primary, and Beowulf itself was currently in opposition to the terminus, almost on the far side of the star. Even with the FTL comm, it took over 6 minutes for a message from System Defense to come this far. Where are they? She heard her own voice ask with what seemed like preposterous calm. Opposite side of the system, 1.3 light minutes outside the limit, 2 degrees above the ecliptic, ma'am. System Defense says they're inbound at 412 gravities from 002 on what looks like a direct heading for Cassandra. As of the time chop on the message, distance from Cassandra was 7.9 light minutes, and current velocity was roughly 600 kps. From that geometry, they can cut the limit's cord and make a 00 with the Cassandra yards in just under 3.5 hours, with turnover at 96 minutes and some change. Truman nodded tightly. The Sollies had timed it well, she thought, because Cassandra was just past western quadrature from Beowulf, with its elongation perpendicular to the direction of the primary, forming a right triangle with the sun. They were well over 14 light minutes apart, closer to 15 really, so any grief headed for Cassandra was headed away from Beowulf. That was the good news. The bad news was that Cassandra was barely 4 light minutes inside the hyperlimit, and that the Solly's astrogation had been damned near perfect. They could go for a 00 with the planet, spend a couple of hours wrecking its yards, and be back out and across the limit in less than 2 hours when they were done, barely 8 hours after crossing the limit inbound. Or they could blow past in a maximum velocity firing run. If they did that, they could be at minimum range in just over 2 hours and 10 minutes, moving at almost 34,000 kps, and arc back across the limit in another 100 minutes or so, in and out and back into hyper in well under 4 hours. The civilian casualties would be horrendous in a successful hit-and-run attack like that, given the limited time to evacuate the yards. Normally, that would have given an attacker pause under both the Deneb Accords and the Eridani Edict, but Solarian restraint hadn't been very noticeable even before the Mesa atrocity. Hypatia and the captured Buccaneer Ops orders were proof enough of that. After Mesa, and the way the Solarian newsies, which really meant Malachi Abruzzi, had portrayed it, restraint seemed even more unlikely. Light off the impellers and spin up the hypergenerators, Benjamin, she said, and tell Steve to start plotting the jump. I want multiple options for intercepting them on their way out, whether they go for a 00 or a high-speed run. Yes, ma'am. Good. I'll be on the flag bridge in 10 minutes. Yes, ma'am. She cut the circuit and turned back to her guests. I think you and Henriette had better be getting back to Leander, Marianne. It seems we have guests. Yes, ma'am. Holman Sanders' smile was 2/3 snarl. Hopefully, it'll all be over before we ever get there. That would be the best outcome from our perspective, Truman agreed. Aside from the 2 squadrons of Agamemnon-class BCPs of the Ready Response Force, Third Fleet's hypergenerators were powered completely down. The Beowulf Junction lay at the heart of a sensor bubble 15 light minutes across that a microbe would find difficult to penetrate, and the fixed defenses were formidable. Under those circumstances, there was little reason to put wear on the hypergenerators and nodes by holding the fleet at instant readiness. The ability to stand those systems down was the real reason there were fixed defenses, and any admiral worth her beret was grateful for them. But there was, of course, a downside to that as well. Time. Time and situations like this one. It would take a Saganami-class cruiser 37 minutes, and an SD like Leander or a Selak like her own Fafnir over 40 to bring up their generators and translate. For that matter, except for the ready response squadrons, every ship would have to bring her impeller nodes up from scratch at the same time, and that alone would take 40 minutes. So not even the Saganami was getting into hyper any sooner than Fafnir. At 6 light hours, the transit would eat up another 27 minutes or so in the beta bands. She could carve 4.5 minutes off that by going as high as the gamma bands, but that seriously increased the chance of scatter when they re-entered N-space. Either way, she was looking at a best-case time requirement of well over an hour before she could be in position to intercept them on their withdrawal. And with their head start inside the limit, it was already impossible for her to actually intercept short of Cassandra. Apollo was long-ranged enough she could bring them under effective fire from outside the limit, while they were still at least 90 minutes short of a 0-0 with the yards. But they were already technically in range for a cataphract launch of their own. Their accuracy would suck at such an extended range, but they demonstrated at Hypatia that enough cataphracts could kill anything, even with a lengthy ballistic phase in its flight profile. They might be as inefficient as a Neanderthal with a club, but if you had enough Neanderthals with clubs, that didn't matter. Worse, every minute they had to close the range would tweak that accuracy upward, and she couldn't take those minutes away from them. Shouldn't matter, she reflected grimly. This is exactly what Mycroft's for, and those poor bastards don't have a clue what's going to happen to them when Admiral McAvoy opens up. Not that I plan to sit on my posterior and wait. If nothing else, we'll probably need all hands for search and rescue after the shooting stops. She grimaced as that thought brought up pictures of Hypatia, but she made herself put it aside. I'll walk the two of you to the lifts, she told her guests and smiled thinly. It's on my way, you might say.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Jekowitz. And a pair of time-colored glasses with which to view the chronological strata of any present-day person and pick out their most embarrassing moment. Plus, thanks, praise, and gratitude for David Weber and Jacob Holo, authors of the Valkyrie Protocol. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.